The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Through the fog of interrupted dreams, I fumbled for my cell phone, squinting at the unknown number glowing on the screen. "David? David, thank God you answered." My sister Beth's voice was shaky, desperate in a way I hadn't heard since our father's funeral 5 years ago. "I need your help. Please, I know it's late, but—" "Beth, where are you calling from? This isn't your number." "I'm at the county jail. Marcus got arrested again." Her voice broke on the last word. Marcus, her husband of 8 years, father of my 2 nephews, and the man who had systematically destroyed my sister's life, one bad decision at a time. They're saying it's a parole violation, something about his address registration. I sat up in bed, running my hand through my hair. My wife, Sarah, stirred beside me, opening one eye in silent question. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and walked to the window overlooking our quiet suburban street. 3 blocks away, the house Beth shared with Marcus sat dark. The house where my nephews, ages 6 and 9, were supposedly sleeping safely in their beds. "What kind of address registration?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "The parole officer says Marcus never updated his address when he moved in with us. He's been reporting our old apartment, the one we gave up 6 months ago." Beth's voice was barely a whisper now. "David, if they violate his parole, he goes back to prison for 2 years, minimum. The boys have already been through so much, and with my job barely covering the bills—" I closed my eyes. Marcus had been released 18 months ago after serving 3 years for armed robbery, his second felony conviction. The conditions of his parole were strict: steady employment, regular check-ins with his parole officer, and immediate notification of any address changes. Somehow, he'd managed to keep the first 2 requirements while completely ignoring the third. "Why didn't he update his address, Beth?" The silence stretched between us like a canyon. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with shame. "Because Mr. Patterson, his parole officer, told him that parolees aren't allowed to live in households with children under 12 unless they get special permission. Marcus was afraid they'd deny it, send him to a halfway house. We couldn't afford to keep paying rent on 2 places. The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. My sister had been living with a man who was technically in violation of his parole for 6 months. Worse, she'd been complicit in hiding it, putting her children, my nephews, at risk of being removed from the home if the authorities discovered the situation. "Beth, I don't understand what you want me to do. This is between Marcus and his parole officer." "No, David, please listen. There might be a way to fix this. Mr. Patterson said if Marcus can prove he's been living at a documented address with an adult relative who can vouch for him, they might let this slide with just an administrative correction. But it has to be someone who's not his spouse." The ask hung in the air between us, unspoken but crystal clear. She wanted me to lie, to tell Marcus's parole officer that he'd been living at my house, that the address mix-up was just a clerical error, that I could vouch for his stability and compliance. "I can't do that, Beth." "Please." The word came out as a sob. "I know it's asking a lot, but there's no one else. Marcus's family won't help. They cut him off after the second arrest. If he goes back to prison, I'll lose the house. The boys will have to change schools again. They've been through enough upheaval, David. They're finally stable, finally doing well in school. Jake made honor roll last month." I thought about my nephews. Jake, serious and bookish at 9, and Tyler, 6 years old, with gap-toothed grins and an endless supply of knock-knock jokes. They'd lived through their father's arrest, trial, and imprisonment. They'd moved 3 times in the past 2 years, and now Beth was asking me to lie to keep their world from collapsing again. "What exactly would I have to say?" Hope crept into Beth's voice. "Just that Marcus has been staying at your place since his release. That you let him use our old apartment address for mail delivery because it was more convenient. Mr. Patterson wants to do a home visit to verify the living situation. If you could just back up the story. A home visit. That meant Officer Patterson would come to my house, expecting to find evidence that Marcus had been living there for 18 months. It meant involving Sarah in the lie. It meant potentially committing a crime myself. Lying to a parole officer had to be some kind of obstruction of justice. I need to think about this, Beth. There's no time to think. Her desperation erupted. They're holding him until Monday. If we can't get this sorted out by then, they'll process the violation and send him back. Please, David, I'm begging you. These boys need their father. Did they, though? That was the question that had haunted me for years. Marcus wasn't a bad man, exactly, but he was weak. Weak in the way that led to poor choices, risky friends, and ultimately to pointing a gun at a convenience store clerk for $200 and a carton of cigarettes. He'd cried during his sentencing, promised Beth he'd change, sworn he'd never put the family through anything like that again. And here we were, 18 months later, with him in jail for another violation of the law. I'll call you back in an hour, I said finally. David, 1 hour, Beth. I promise. I hung up and stood in the darkness of my bedroom, watching Sarah's sleeping form. We'd been married for 12 years, and in all that time I'd never lied to her about anything important. We'd built our relationship on trust, on the kind of honest communication that had seen us through infertility treatments, job losses, and the slow, painful distance that had grown between us over the past year. Sarah stirred as I slipped back into bed. Everything okay? Beth's in trouble, I said quietly. Marcus got arrested again. She was fully awake now, propping herself up on one elbow. What did he do this time? I told her about the parole violation, about Beth's request, about the impossible choice I was being asked to make. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. You can't lie to a parole officer, David. That's got to be a felony. I know. And even if it wasn't illegal, it's still lying. It's still fraud. I know that too. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but firm. Those boys have been through enough, but lying isn't going to fix their problems. It's just going to create new ones. She was right, of course. Sarah was always right about these kinds of things. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with. Her moral clarity, her ability to see through complicated situations to the ethical core underneath. But it was also the quality that had been driving us apart lately, as life became messier and the right choices became less obvious. What if this is their last chance? I asked. What if Marcus really has changed, and this is just a stupid bureaucratic mistake that destroys their family? Then he should have followed the rules from the beginning. He should have updated his address and applied for permission to live with the children. He should have been honest with his parole officer instead of lying for 6 months. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Jake's honor roll certificate that Beth had shown me with such pride, about Tyler's excitement when Marcus had taught him to ride a bicycle without training wheels. Whatever Marcus's faults, the boys loved him. And Beth was drowning, had been drowning for years, trying to hold her family together through sheer force of will. I'm going to help them, I said finally. Sarah sat up fully, her silhouette sharp against the window. David, no. Please think about what you're saying. I have thought about it. Those kids are my nephews. Beth is my sister. If there's a chance I can keep their family together, by committing a crime, by lying under oath, possibly, by asking me to be complicit in defrauding the state parole system. Her words hit like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the guilt I was already feeling. But underneath the guilt was something stronger. The image of Jake and Tyler losing another father figure, moving to another apartment, starting over at another school. "I'll keep you out of it," I said. "I'll handle the home visit myself. Make sure you're not here when Patterson comes by." "That's not the point, David." Sarah's voice was rising now. "The point is that you're talking about lying to law enforcement to help a convicted felon avoid the consequences of breaking his parole. Do you understand how insane that sounds?" We argued for another 20 minutes, our voices growing louder despite our efforts to keep them low. Sarah deployed every rational argument she could think of. The legal risks, the ethical implications, the precedent it would set for Marcus's future behavior. I countered with emotional appeals, family loyalty, the children's welfare, the possibility of redemption. Neither of us budged. Finally, Sarah got out of bed and started pulling clothes from the dresser. "I can't be part of this, David. I won't be part of this." "Where are you going?" "To my sister's house. I'll stay there until you come to your senses." She paused in the doorway, her face a mask of disappointment. "I married a man I could trust, a man who followed the law and told the truth. I don't know who you're becoming, but it's not someone I recognize." The sound of the front door closing 20 minutes later was like a gunshot in the quiet house. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, knowing I had to call Beth back, but unable to make my fingers dial the number. In the end, it wasn't the arguments about right and wrong that decided me. It wasn't even the thought of my nephews crying themselves to sleep in another unfamiliar bedroom. It was the memory of Beth at our father's funeral, standing alone by the graveside after everyone else had left, whispering apologies to a man who died disappointed in both his children for different reasons. She'd sacrificed her college education to take care of Dad during his final illness. She'd put her own dreams on hold to raise Marcus's children while he served his sentence. She had never asked me for anything significant until now. I called her back at 4:15 a.m. "I'll do it," I said when she answered. "But we need to get our story straight. And Marcus needs to understand that this is his last chance. One more screw-up and he's on his own." The relief in her voice was overwhelming. "Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I'll never forget this." The next 4 days were a masterclass in deception. I spent Saturday moving furniture around in my guest room, making it look lived in. I scattered some of Marcus's clothes in the closet, left a few of his books on the nightstand, even put an old toothbrush in the guest bathroom. Beth helped, bringing over personal items that would support the story we were going to tell. Marcus was released on bail Monday morning, pending the parole hearing scheduled for Thursday. When he came to my house to prep for Officer Patterson's visit, I barely recognized him. Prison had aged him in hard lines around his eyes and a permanent wariness in his posture. But he was genuinely grateful, pumping my hand and promising this would never happen again. "I know you're taking a big risk for me," he said. "I won't forget it." Officer Patterson arrived Tuesday afternoon, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my living room. I gave her the tour I'd rehearsed, showing her the guest room where Marcus supposedly slept, explaining the arrangement we'd worked out for his transition back to civilian life. "And you've had no problems with Mr. Valdez living here?" she asked, making notes on a clipboard. "None at all. Marcus has been respectful, follows house rules, helps with chores. He's really trying to turn his life around." The lies came easier than I'd expected, flowing out with such practiced smoothness that I almost believed them myself. Officer Patterson seemed satisfied, making check marks on her form and nodding approvingly. "This is exactly the kind of stable living situation we like to see," she said. "Mr. Valdez is lucky to have family willing to support his reintegration." When she left, I felt a mixture of relief and nausea. The hardest part was over, but I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I was now officially a liar, a fraud, a person who obstructed justice to protect my family. Sarah didn't come home that night, or the next. When I called, she said she needed more time to think. Time to decide whether she could live with the choice I'd made. The parole hearing went smoothly. Officer Patterson's positive report, combined with Marcus's employment record and family situation, convinced the hearing officer to treat the address issue as an administrative error rather than a willful violation. Marcus received a formal reprimand and was ordered to maintain current address records going forward. Beth cried when she called to tell me the news. The family was staying together. The boys would finish the school year in familiar classrooms. Marcus had a second chance to prove himself. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. The hollowness grew over the following weeks as Sarah continued staying at her sister's house. We met for coffee twice, strained conversations where she asked whether I regretted my decision, and I gave increasingly defensive answers. The truth was, I didn't regret helping Beth and the boys, but I was starting to regret the cost. Sarah filed for divorce 6 weeks later. I stared at the papers for a long time before calling her. Is this really what you want? I want to be married to someone I can trust, she said. Someone who shares my values. I don't think that's you anymore, David. It was one lie, Sarah. One time to help my family. It was a choice, she corrected. A choice that showed me who you really are when push comes to shove. You chose deception over honesty. You chose family loyalty over legal obligation. You chose what felt good over what was right. I wanted to argue, to explain that the choice hadn't been that simple, that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. But the words stuck in my throat, because part of me wondered if she was right. The divorce proceedings were civil but cold. We'd never had children, so custody wasn't an issue. We divided assets with mathematical precision. She took the house. I couldn't afford the payments anyway. I took the car. We split the savings down the middle. 12 years of marriage reduced to a spreadsheet and a stack of legal documents. Sarah's lawyer was a sharp woman named Andrea Chen, who treated the case with clinical efficiency. During our final settlement conference, she asked whether I wanted to speak on the record about my motivations for helping Marcus. Your wife has indicated that the breakdown of your marriage stems from your willingness to lie to law enforcement on behalf of your brother-in-law. She's seeking a statement for the record about your character and decision-making process. I looked across the conference table at Sarah, who was studying her hands. In all our years together, she'd never looked so tired. Yes, I said. I want to make a statement. Andrea Chen activated a small recording device. Go ahead, Mr. Morrison. I took a deep breath. My sister called me at 3 a.m., desperate and afraid. Her husband, the father of my 2 nephews, was facing a parole violation that would send him to prison for 2 years and destroy their family. She asked me to lie about his address to keep him out of jail. Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in weeks. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was illegal. My wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, told me exactly how wrong it was, and she was right about everything. But I also knew that 2 little boys would lose their father again, that my sister would lose her home, that a family I love would be scattered to the winds. I paused, trying to find the right words for what came next. So I lied. I staged my guest room to look like Marcus had been living there. I lied to his parole officer during a home visit. I helped him avoid the consequences of breaking his parole conditions. And if I had to do it over again, knowing exactly what it would cost me, I think I'd make the same choice. The room was silent, except for the soft whir of the recording device. I understand why my wife can't live with that choice. I understand why she sees it as a fundamental character flaw, a betrayal of the values we are supposed to share. She's not wrong. But sometimes the right choice isn't the legal choice. Sometimes the right choice isn't the honest choice. Sometimes you have to choose between being a good citizen and being a good brother. and I chose to be a good brother. I looked at Sarah again. I'm sorry our marriage is ending because of this. I'm sorry I disappointed you, but I'm not sorry I helped my family when they needed me most. Andrea Chen clicked off the recorder. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That'll be part of the record. Sarah and I signed the divorce papers that afternoon. As we walked out of the lawyer's office, she touched my arm gently. I hope it was worth it, she said. It wasn't cruel or sarcastic, just sad. So do I replied. 6 months later, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment across town when Beth called with news I'd been dreading since the day I lied to Officer Patterson. Marcus got arrested again, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. Armed robbery, same as before. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of consequences settling over me. What happened? He lost his job 3 weeks ago. Got fired for showing up late too many times. He was too proud to tell me, so he kept pretending to go to work while he was actually looking for something else. When the bills started piling up and he couldn't find anything, she didn't need to finish. Marcus had fallen back into old patterns, old solutions to new problems. The stable home life, the supportive family, the second chance I'd helped him secure. None of it had been enough to overcome whatever fundamental weakness led him to point guns at strangers for money. They're saying it's a third strike, Beth continued. 25 to life. 25 to life. I thought about Officer Patterson's satisfied expression when she'd approved Marcus's living situation, about her comment that he was lucky to have family support. I thought about the lie I'd told so confidently, the deception that had seemed so justified in the moment. What about the boys? They're with me, for now, but I can't afford the house payments without Marcus's income, and he wasn't exactly contributing much anyway. We'll probably have to move back to an apartment. So the very outcome I'd lied to prevent, the family disruption, the housing instability, the children being uprooted again, was happening anyway, just delayed by 8 months and made worse by Marcus's new conviction. I'm sorry, Beth. Don't be sorry. You tried to help. That's more than anyone else was willing to do. But was it help? Or had it been enabling? By lying for Marcus, had I removed one of the consequences that might have motivated him to take his parole conditions more seriously? Had my deception actually made things worse in the long run? These were the questions that kept me awake at night in my empty apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether Sarah had been right about more than just the ethics of lying to law enforcement. A year later, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked good, healthier somehow, with a lightness in her step that I hadn't seen in our final months together. She was with a man I didn't recognize, someone who made her laugh in a way that reminded me of our early dating years. We exchanged pleasantries, carefully avoiding the subject of our divorce or its causes. But as I was leaving, she called my name. David, how are your nephews doing? I turned back, surprised by the question. They're adjusting. Beth moved them to a smaller apartment, but they're managing. Jake's still doing well in school. She nodded. I think about them sometimes, wonder how they're handling everything. They're resilient kids. They shouldn't have to be. The comment hung between us, loaded with everything we'd never resolved about my choice and its consequences. She wasn't wrong. Children shouldn't have to be resilient because the adults in their lives keep making choices that destabilize their world. For what it's worth, I said, I think you were right. About the lying, about the consequences. Maybe if I'd said no, if Marcus had faced real accountability earlier. Sarah's expression softened. Maybe. Or maybe he would have ended up in the same place anyway, just sooner. We'll never know. Her companion was waiting patiently by the door, checking his phone but clearly ready to leave. Sarah glanced at him, then back at me. I don't regret our divorce, David. But I don't hate you for the choice you made either. I couldn't live with someone who would make that choice. Does that make sense? It did make sense, in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. Sarah had always been clear about her boundaries, about the kind of person she could and couldn't be with. There was something almost admirable about her willingness to end our marriage rather than compromise her values. "Take care of yourself," she said, and meant it. "You too." I watched her leave with her new partner, noting the easy familiarity between them, the way she leaned into him as they walked away. She'd found someone who shared her moral clarity, someone who would never put her in the position of choosing between her principles and her marriage. That night I called Beth to check on the boys. Jake answered the phone with his usual serious tone. "Uncle David, Mom's at work. She won't be home until 11. "That's okay. I was calling to talk to you anyway. How are you doing, buddy?" "Fine." The word carried the weight of a 9-year-old trying to be strong for the adults around him. "Tyler's been having nightmares again." Tyler had nightmares every time their family situation changed. When Marcus first went to prison, when they moved apartments, when he was arrested again. The counselor Beth had found said it was normal for children in unstable environments, but that didn't make it easier to hear about. "What kind of nightmares?" "About bad guys coming to take Mom away. I told him that won't happen, but he doesn't believe me." 9 years old, and Jake was already learning that the adults in his life couldn't be counted on to keep their promises. That the people who were supposed to protect him might disappear without warning, might make choices that turned his world upside down. "You're a good big brother, Jake, but it's not your job to take care of everyone. That's what the grown-ups are for." "The grown-ups aren't doing a very good job." The honesty of it was devastating. Jake was right. The grown-ups in his life, myself included, had failed him repeatedly. Marcus with his criminal choices, Beth with her inability to leave an unstable relationship, me with my willingness to lie rather than face hard truths. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said lamely. "Big mistakes. Yeah, big mistakes." We talked for a few more minutes about school, about his latest book report, about the science fair project he was working on. Normal kid stuff that felt precious against the backdrop of everything else that was falling apart around him. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the chain of events that had started with Beth's desperate phone call 18 months ago. The lie I'd told to keep Marcus out of prison. The marriage that had ended because of my choice. The family that had been torn apart anyway, just delayed and made more complicated. Had I been wrong to lie for Marcus? Sarah certainly thought so, and the results seemed to support her position. Marcus was now facing life in prison. The boys were back in an unstable housing situation, and Beth was working double shifts to keep them afloat. But when I tried to imagine that night differently, tried to picture myself telling Beth no, hanging up the phone, letting Marcus face the consequences of his parole violation, I still couldn't do it. Even knowing how everything turned out, I couldn't imagine abandoning my family when they needed me most. Maybe that made me weak. Maybe it made me an enabler, someone who prioritized family loyalty over legal obligation and made bad situations worse through misguided kindness. Or maybe it just made me human. The truth I'd told during my divorce proceedings still felt true. Sometimes you have to choose between being a good citizen and being a good brother. Sometimes the right choice isn't the legal choice or the honest choice. Sometimes you have to live with the consequences of doing what feels necessary in the moment, even when those consequences include losing the person you love most. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Beth's contact information. She'd be at work for another 3 hours, but I could leave her a voicemail. Let her know I was thinking about her and the boys. Remind her that she wasn't facing this latest crisis alone. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit call and waited for the beep. "Hey, Beth, it's David. I know you're at work, but I wanted to check in. I talked to Jake tonight, and he sounds like he's handling things as well as can be expected. Listen, I know money's tight right now, and I know you hate asking for help, but I have some savings built up. If you need anything, help with rent, groceries, whatever, just ask. We're family. That means something. I paused, trying to find the right words for what came next. I've been thinking a lot about the choice I made when Marcus got arrested the first time, about whether it was right, whether it helped or made things worse. I still don't know the answer to that, but I know I'd rather live in a world where people help their families, even when it's messy and complicated and doesn't turn out the way we hoped, even when it costs them something important. I took a breath. Anyway, give the boys my love. Tell them Uncle David is always here if they need anything. And Beth, take care of yourself, too. You matter just as much as everyone else you're trying to protect. I hung up and stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about moral clarity and messy compromises, about the choices we make when there are no good options, about the families we love and the prices we pay to keep them together. Somewhere across town, my nephews were sleeping in beds that might not be there next month, in an apartment that might not be affordable much longer, with a mother who was working herself to exhaustion to give them some semblance of stability. And somewhere else, Sarah was probably curled up next to someone who would never ask her to compromise her principles, never put her in the position of choosing between right and wrong, never force her to decide what mattered more, the law or the people she loved. Both of those realities were true. Both of them were the result of choices I'd made, lies I'd told, truths I'd revealed in a divorce court on a Tuesday afternoon when my marriage finally crumbled under the weight of moral disagreement. I couldn't change any of it now. All I could do was live with the consequences and keep showing up for the people who needed me, even when, especially when, showing up meant making choices that other people couldn't understand or forgive. That was the truth I'd learned in the months since Beth's desperate phone call. That love makes you lie sometimes, that family makes you break rules sometimes, that doing right by the people you care about sometimes means doing wrong by everything else. It wasn't a comfortable truth. It wasn't a clean truth. But it was my truth, and I'd told it honestly when it mattered most, even if it had cost me everything else I thought I wanted.